Sometimes life's journey for students, parents, siblings, employees seems as if they're on a great incline, causing us to calculate each step for fear of falling to our destruction. In fact, it seems like the higher the height, the rougher the terrain, and the more violent the resistance becomes. In my family, there's always been an old saying that circulated amongst the elders and trickled down to the younger generations that simply says, life is but an uphill journey. And so I wish to talk today about an uphill journey. One cold morning, when the soil was damp from the melting frost, I sat in a tree stand that stood about 20 feet above the ground, situated at the edge of this ravine that had a drastic decline, and it bottomed out into a valley where a pond had formed over a period of time. And as I sat there looking over this valley, waiting for this 12-point buck to reveal himself, my attention fastened to this female gender deer, which outdoorsmen and hunters would call a doe, which the Bible calls a hind, came across the ravine on the opposite side of me. And I began to watch this doe as she went down this sharp, steep ravine. And it dawned on me how perfectly she calculated her steps, looking as if a ballerina going down this hill with such poise and profession. And now all of a sudden my mind was taken off of bragging rights trying to find a buck to the viewing of this creature, because now my mind is set on how in the world will she make it back to the top. So I sat there and I watched her as she cautiously stooped down, bowing her head, and drank her fill. And after she had drank her fill, she turned back to this sharp incline. And with one steamy blow from her nostrils, took off up the hill, striding, reaching, climbing, until every muscle displayed within her body. And as she made it to the top, and vanished back into the foliage, my mind left the woods of Brandon, Mississippi, and I traveled back in time to a dust-settled battleground where a victorious king who had every right to play his string and dance before the Lord, but instead he sat down and put pen to parchment and wrote a brand new song unto the Lord. I heard David say, God is my fortress, and he sets the blameless in his way. Here it is. He makes my feet like hind feet and set me on my high places. I believe that studying the context from which the passage is pulled, it should suggest unto us that David had an uphill journey. In this particular psalm, it is written in the 2nd chapter of Samuel. And it shows us how David is reflecting on his life. He looks back over his constant fleeing from his father-in-law Saul, which is seen in 1 Samuel. And then it also captures his reflection on the chaos that his own son, Absalom, causes. In chapter 15, 16, and 17, as his own son tried to snatch the kingdom from his father's hand. David reflects on chapter 18 when his very men of valor went to battle with his son Absalom, and Absalom flees from the battle only to be caught into the branches by the hair of his head. And as he hangs between heaven and earth, Joab comes by and strikes him dead. And then we see in chapter 19, a conspiracy is born by two people. And in chapter 20, those two conspirators are hunted down. One is struck under his fifth rib. The other one is beheaded and his head is tossed over the wall. In chapter 21, we see where another battle has broken out. 4 to be exact. And in each of these 4 battles, 4 more giants present themselves. And God sees to it the very destruction of each of these giants. Some of the preachers back home would say these were the 4 brothers of Goliath. However, we can all agree to a certain point that David had an uphill journey. We can even agree that life itself is an uphill journey because some of us are still pursued by priorities. Some of our own responsibilities have become giants and they cut at us. They try to bog us down under the pressure. It makes it so hard for you to plant one foot in front of the next as you journey upward and forward. However, one point that's worth mentioning is the fact that God himself assures the steps of his children. In Psalms 18:36, God keeps the feet of his saints. In Psalms 37:23, God orders the steps of a good man and he delights in his way. It's not your ability that brings you or keeps you while you're journeying up this uphill journey, but God himself is responsible for your sure-footedness over any terrain. Now, I studied the literary narrative from the Psalm, and this passage in particular caused me to really try to find out the first person, second person, and third person form of narrative. And one thing I found out that David, while writing this particular passage that I chose, is writing in third person, and then he writes in second person. When talking in third person, you're talking about someone. When you're talking in second person, you're actually talking directly to someone. From verse 33, 34, and 35, he's talking in the third person. And then in verse 36 and verse 37, David is talking in the second person. For instance, verse 33, 34, 35, he's talking about God and what God does. God is my fortress. He sets the blameless in his way. He makes my feet like hind feet. He sets me on high places. He trained my hands for battle. However, in verse 36 and 37, David begins to talk to God himself. He says, you have given me the shield of your salvation. Your help makes me great. You enlarge my footsteps under me. David's attitude shifts from testifying about the works of God to ultimately glorifying God himself. And my hope for this class is this. As we journey through the courses of our curriculums and through life's uphill journey, my hope is that our testifying will also lead to the glorification of a true and merciful God. The doe that I spoke about earlier, as she was on her uphill journey and she valiantly struggled her way climbing back up the ravine, I was somewhat glad that she made it. But we, the students of this homiletical class, should be encouraged by another story of a lamb who had an uphill journey. It was a journey that started out in the Garden of Gethsemane, and although the weights of this sinful world burdened his heart and seemed to stall his momentum, God gave him sure-footedness. Yes, sir. Gave him sure steps through the house of Caiaphas, through the halls of Herod, through the courts of Pilate, through the Via Dolorosa. God gave him steps. All the way up Calvary's hill, even on the cross thereof. That's right. He made it. To the top, he made it. Yeah. To the cross, he made it through the grave. And since God allows his own son to make it, Brothers and sisters, we have something better than hind feet. We have the very presence of God. Jesus himself said in his own words, Matthew 28, the B clause of verse 20, he says, lo, I'm with you. And if Jesus is with us, we have our very own divine fall protection. Let us bow our heads.